Today, we have a great discussion, which is titled, oh, it's not on screen, Bringing Digital Art to Life. And to discuss that, we have 4, potentially 5 panelists. We are pending one more. And to talk about this, it's my pleasure to introduce Nancy Baker Cahill, who's a new media artist. Hi, Nancy. And then we love the fan support from the crowd. And then Micol, who's the founder and CEO of Vertical Crypto Art. And then joining us online, we have Ryan Roybal, founder of NFT Collective, Edward Zipco, director and co-founder of SuperchiefGalleryNFT, who might be joining us later on. And then we also have Laurent, who's the co-publisher and co-owner and editor at Whitewall. So hi, guys. Thanks for joining in online.
Thank you for having us. Sorry not being in town.
Well, we wish you could be here with us, but it's great to have you dial in as well. So to kick off this conversation, each of you kind of represents different iterations of the art world and how it's kind of collectively being impacted by new technology. So before we dig into that, Nancy, one question I want to ask for you is, how did you actually come to explore this world of NFTs, and how did you build your stance on it as an artist?
Thank you so much for that question. It's interesting, you know, back in 2017, I had first started thinking about blockchain and actually was really interested in how to fractionalize artwork, but I couldn't really wrap my brain around it. It didn't really fit with my practice. I couldn't really figure out how that would actually work, although obviously other people did and did it very well. So it wasn't until really 2020 that I started to think about it more deeply, and I was invited actually by, I think, someone who's in the audience here, Julie Walsh, to participate in an incredible platform, a show. She curated an exhibition on a platform that is artist-created, artist-run by Casey Reese called Fearophile. And that was my first real introduction into the NFT space, as we say, which I know is very hackneyed and annoying to everybody. So I'll try not to use it. But anyway, but it was after that things really clicked, and I really saw the conceptual potential of blockchain and NFTs and how it would fit with my practice, which is in many ways very, very focused on accountability and different types of social accountabilities. So it was a very natural fit, the sort of medium fit the conceptual exigencies of the work.
I think we should definitely dig into the fractionalization of art and ownership later on, because I think that's a topic we touched upon yesterday that has a lot more questions behind it than people realize. But before we get to that, Micol, I'd love for you to tell us a bit more about vertical crypto art and what it's doing to essentially offer underrepresented artists more of a platform.
Yeah, sure. So vertical crypto art started almost 2 years ago. And I got actually introduced to the space by an artist, a friend of mine. I kind of always was around the underground art scene, especially in London. I lived there. And yeah, he told me, like, I think this is something that you would really enjoy. I've worked at the intersection of kind of like art and tech for a while. And that's how vertical crypto art started, pretty much as a project, really. And I started documenting and talking to a lot of the artists that were doing amazing work and were essentially pioneering crypto art at the time. And it then developed into, you know, what it is now, which is essentially more of a startup, more of a business. And we've started actually an online NFT residency program last year in June, which focuses on giving education to artists globally on Web3, the metaverse, crypto art, and digital art. And yeah, we've onboarded almost 75 artists into the space in various different formats. All of the classes that we do are actually free online for anyone to take a look at, to jump in. We have like 25 mentors teaching the classes, and yeah, it's a great community. And obviously, other than that, yeah, we do curation and lots of other things.
So vertical crypto art basically looked at artists that were already producing great work and then offering them a new platform, as well as giving future artists the tools to be able to join in the space as well, as and when they're ready.
Exactly.
I think that's fantastic. I now want to go to Laurent, who is in charge of Whitewall magazine, which is an art, fashion, lifestyle magazine. So when NFTs first emerged, how did Whitewall as a publication first approach it? What was the stance it took, and has it changed since?
Well, actually, we started early on, even before uh, it was called an NFT. We actually been lucky to be in touch with various artists that were exploring different mediums. And I remember that the first artist that talked to us about this new medium and the NFT was Sarah Mejoyas. And we've been lucky to have a great relationship with her and being very impressed with everything that she built and created. We were very intrigued. And then obviously COVID happened, and then working remotely, then 2020, everyone started the craze about NFTs. And we realized that it was just a new medium to allow incredible, talented creatives to express themselves and to reach audiences that otherwise wouldn't be reached. So we really just embarked in that and trying to create the same nature of content for those artists that we created for the contemporary art world and the artists that we have been following since the inception of the magazine now 16 years ago. So we also opened the pages of the imprint to those artists, which was actually a bit of a challenge also just to get the images of the work, because most of the work were done for 3D or for digital, and to get the images for print publication was something a bit different. And it was for us super interesting to be able to continue our mission, which was bridging the gap in between different worlds. And so we keep that stand of bridging the gap in between the traditional contemporary art and the digital art. And this is what we've been doing, and we're working with a lot more partners now and trying to have a voice emerge into the traditional landscape of contemporary art to make it understanding that digital artists and NFT are just a new medium that continue the same mission of exploring new realities and new creatives. So it hasn't evolved that much.
I think the common theme we're seeing here is very early stage conversations around this technology and how it relates to the art world. And what I like about what you're saying is that Whitewall essentially didn't change its spots to embrace it. It kind of tried to find the balance between traditional media and new media, which is something we're going to dig into more throughout this conversation. So next, my question goes to both Edward and Ryan. The both of you have worked to bring, digital art to life through physical and immersive gallery settings. So how have NFTs specifically enabled that? Maybe we start with you, Edward.
Yeah, sure thing. Well, a little background on Superchief. So we were a traditional large-scale warehouse gallery that opened up in New York in 2012. And then from there, we expanded out to LA and then Miami. And the idea was to kind of create these large-scale warehouse art galleries that would allow the community to gather and kind of grow at a fast pace. And I think back in 2016, when we started to include digital native work and focus there, I think it really kind of keyed us into the artists that were being left out of the conversation. And I think that was like a really big part for us was, a lot of our community came out of the graffiti and street art movement kind of being welcomed into the fine art world. So we've seen what it's like when artists as a genre are just left out of the conversation or, meaningfully excluded because there aren't ways to really generate income from their medium. So for us, when we got started, it was really about how do we include them in the conversation? How do we showcase work that we really believe in and not exclude the medium of our generation from the exhibitions and the community play? So from there, it kind of keyed us into a real need for them to kind of not only be centered as artists, but also nurtured into this world. And I think that as we saw NFTs kind of emerge as a game changer that really was about royalties for artists for the first time, I mean, our entire organization kind of dove in hard body because it was just it was something that really needed not just institutional support at that time, but curatorial support. So we were really thankful and fortunate to have, some really great groups behind us early on in early 2021 that kind of gave us the opportunity to open the world's first IRL NFT gallery that was like a dedicated continual space. From that point, it really became clear to us that like the purpose of an IRL space or an IRL space was like, one, obviously for outreach and for an opportunity of people like become aware of what NFTs are, what digital art can be on the blockchain, and then also like an opportunity for these communities to gather for the first times. A lot of these organizations, groups, and this whole wildfire started obviously over COVID. So many people like didn't get to really see the communities they were a part of in person. And I think that that was like a real important moment to get to bring groups together and then bring like specifically NFT and like digital groups who, it's such an easy thing for them to just exist online. But I think the IRL capacity, like when we partnered with Christie's auction house to do the CryptoPunks auction in New York, like the first one that they did it at Superchief. And it was such a really exuberant moment, just to kind of like look around the room. And there were so many people in DAOs that like, I don't know, many people had never actually met face to face. And I think that's an important thing to foster as much as we can, I think.
Yeah, I think something you touched on earlier was that there needs to be more meaningful conversations around the inclusion of different genres of art into, I guess, what's considered the more traditional or the more celebrated art world. And this is one way we can look into doing that. But before we get into that, Ryan, what are you also doing in this space to make sure that these conversations are being had?
Yeah, I think something, I mean, just to touch on everything that both have been mentioned before is that, I mean, I remember when we started scouting for locations for our first IRL event in New York, I was hopping into the Superchief Gallery. I was like, wow, it's finally incredible to see like a full NFT immersive gallery for the first time. And that was really like a pivotal moment for us that actually probably catalyzed a lot of the movement that we decided to make. So the first event that we hosted was actually in Bushwick. It was called Influences, and it was a IRL theatrical experience where we kind of meld the theatrical element from live performers into the actual visual performances of the works from digital artists. So we had like a very large 64 or 65 inch by like 14-foot screen that was 3D, and it tied this unison of like the artwork that these digital artists had created were then created around the harmonics and the movement that the live actors did. So it was kind of like really trying to rethink of how we can embody this, what we call a digi-fizzy experience, so that people, they come to the exhibition, the theater, and they have this moment where there's this connection and where they can't really tell where one begins and one starts. And I think that's like, I think a common thread that we're trying to have on a lot of the works and pieces that we put together. I mean, now we have our gallery, our physical gallery, the Highline 9 in West Chelsea in New York. And here we're starting to play with options and think about how we can have like, live minting sessions that are then connected to like a metaverse experience where people that aren't present at that moment can also have a component that's tied to that physical experience. And this is really where I think personally that the NFT technology is giving us a really great ability to start to create new experiences, have narratives that can be met in physical space and in digital space. And it's opening the door for people who maybe can't be in there, who can't be in New York, who maybe for people who live in another country who can't make that out. So we're really trying to give this more depth and just extend the, how would you say, extend the value of the work that the artist is creating.
So what I've observed from all of your answers is there's actually two touch points in terms of how we capture these new genres of art and how we make sure that we're having these meaningful discussions around inclusion. And that's because there are genres of art that were notoriously underrepresented in the art world, like we said before, street art and graffiti art. And we're also seeing the emergence of whole new genres of art in the crypto space, because whether it's a meme or whether it's a GIF or even a pixelated animation, these are things that are not necessarily recognized nor valued nor consumed in the same way as traditional art. So trying to have this conversation where we say, how can we offer them the same platform, the same recognition, and the same sense of value is essentially going to be a challenge. So that's I mean, Nancy, you're a new media artist. How do you see that affecting your work? And is that a challenge that you've come across as well?
I mean, I see it as a enormous opportunity, and what's gratifying about it, and I think this is well worn, this observation, is that, you know, for digital artists, of course, it's really gratifying to have not just another means of remuneration, but having your work acknowledged as something of value. So that's the most sort of obvious benefit to working in you know, with blockchain or with NFTs. But I do think that what's super exciting, you know, I think that a lot of these, I think, you know, there's such a plurality of these different ecosystems, and I don't think any of them need to be mutually exclusive. I think anytime, you know, inroads are made or innovations are made, people get very, you know, upset, territorial, and I actually think it's what's really thrilling is what he was talking about earlier, is, you know, that you can have incredible cross-pollination and interdisciplinary collaboration. And all of these tools, the tools of new media, the tools of new media art, allow for all of that. And so, I don't know, I think that part of it, the only way in which I will claim a kind of techno-optimism is around these kind of the extraordinary opportunity for creative innovation and collaboration.
And Micol, I want to ask you as well, in the same vein, when you're working with a collective of artists who are using these platforms to gain a bit more recognition, gain a bit more representation, is there a challenge in terms of how you negotiate the conversation between this new art world and this old art world?
I mean, I think, first of all, like, there's one thing to be said, that digital art is not new, in the sense that it didn't start with NFTs. And so if we look back into history, curatorially, you know, exhibitions were made before NFTs of digital art. And I think that's important to consider, and to, like, also contextualize it within the NFT space. And actually, a lot of the intersection that I find is really interesting is collaborating with, let's say, more contemporary art, fine art world. For example, we've worked with Whitewall, working with, like, curators that have been curating digital, new media, net art for many, many years before NFTs, and finding ways in which somebody like myself or us at Vertical Crypto Art can bring maybe a more NFT native perspective, and bring in some of these artists who are maybe underrepresented and have discovered how they can actually have a place and a space with NFTs into a conversation with people that have been talking about, like, digital art, net art, GIF art for years. And I think that exchange is super valuable, and it's where a really good spot is created.
So in that exchange, that's where I want to bring Laurent back into the conversation and Whitewall, because we, as you rightfully mentioned earlier, that you're trying to find this balance between these two worlds and make sure that, you know, both sides are represented, both sides of the conversation are being heard. But what are you focused on at Whitewall at the moment to make that happen?
Well, we're trying to actually balance the interviews and the content we create in between the traditional artists that have been represented in galleries or institutions, and new emerging crypto artists, so to speak, or digital creatives, and trying to ask them the same questions. Sorry. Really to create a part, an even discussion, because even though the medium is very different and the background may be different, the reality is the same. And now, obviously, there is the financial element that now some crypto artists have been selling works for far more money than any living contemporary artists have. And we are now just even creating a right balance in between the content we've always created with exhibitions and shows and galleries, and now the content to create about drops. And we just try to figure out the best way to accompany artists before their drops or just slightly after, and to give them the opportunity to address our traditional audiences, I want to say. And also, by doing that, we invite crypto natives to discover a bit more of the contemporary art. Because when we write about an artist that is doing a drop in the same pages, or if you go online and scroll on the website, you'll see an exhibition about an artist opening a show in Paris, in London, in New York, and so on. So really trying to create a dialogue in between those two worlds that are going to coexist and that are already coexisting in a natural way, and trying to onboard the traditional art collector into the digital world, and trying to explain the traditional art world to the crypto natives. And this is the balance that we're trying to find now on the website and on our publication, because we do the same in the print edition.
Yeah, I couldn't agree.
Oh, please go on.
No, I wanted to touch, because I couldn't agree more with this comment, because it's these two parallel worlds right now that are kind of both going at the same time at different moments. And I think that it's about the education is that bridge between both of them, because we have, the NFT art world that's, has emerged on its own. I'm not going to call it the digital art world, because it's not that, like Micol had said earlier. And then we have the contemporary art world, which has always been moving all along on its own as well. But now we have these two similar technologies that are cross-pollinating from time to time. And I think the really important element is how each one is educated about each other, because that's the moment that we're going to have these aha positions and moments where people are saying, oh, wow, I didn't know that I could do this with my artwork, or oh, how do we showcase it like this on this digital realm? And I believe that this is the moment that people are actually going to be able to extend into that other world and say, hey, well, now both of us understand and we can coexist and create. And I think this is going to be the special moment that's going to come through shortly.
Yeah,
so
I couldn't agree more.
Along that argument of each of these different art worlds almost growing and cultivating themselves in their own walled gardens. And yes, we are seeing some cross-pollination, but we're only at the very beginning of that. What are some of the things that you feel the traditional art world, as it were, needs to understand or wrap their heads around a bit more to become a more collaborative part of this process? Because as Nancy, as you were saying earlier, there's a lot of almost territorialism around this space. And I think it's the typical conversation, it's not a new conversation, around the old guard meets the new and the resistance against change and innovation and new potential. So what's the mindset shift that needs to take place before we can actually start seeing real collaboration?
Everything gets complicated with money. So money is going to be the thing. I mean, the context we're in, let's face it, is part of the issue, right? And one of the things that I think, I'm so interested in sort of the conceptual potential of the medium. So I'm not paying as close attention to the markets themselves, but I do think that what concerns me, and I'm not dodging your question about integration. I think that's that may also be solved by the market. I'm not sure, but what really concerns me is that that a lot of the imbalances and inequities and sort of externalities of like capitalism that show up in the traditional art market are also being reproduced here. So we have such vast differences, and we know there's basically one demographic that benefits at a disproportional, asymmetrical rate, and that itself has not, that's the promise of NFTs, the promise of Web3 even hasn't really yet. It's somewhat. It has so far failed to embody that potential. I'm not saying it won't. I think there are any number of, and I was just asked in the interview, I was asked a really tough question about this. So I'm not claiming to have the answers, but I do think that, beyond territorialism, we have these larger overarching issues around participation. And while, yes, it's exciting and thrilling that there's so much more autonomy and sovereignty to the artist and the artist's ability to participate and to sell their work, et cetera, the numbers aren't necessarily reflecting that in any way that feels particularly meaningful to me as an artist.
Couldn't agree more. And it is the truth, when you look at a lot of the media as well that gets portrayed outside, you only see really even say it's 0.5% of what is the NFT world. Actually, there's a whole other area of artists who are actually like struggling, you know, exactly in the same way than the traditional art space. If you think about platforms as well, they are the new gatekeepers, you know. Somebody wants to get on Super Rare, they need to get accepted. Somebody wants to get on any of these gated marketplaces to be seen, to be heard, to have a place in a space. It is a gate-kept environment, exactly as the traditional art world is. So I think the dream of, not to be like, you know, negative or anything, the dream of the NFT space being decentralized and open and accessible is only true if the people within the space make it so. At the moment, it's not the case.
So we're essentially running the risk of recreating the same art world, a hierarchy in this digital realm, decentralized or not. And in that, I mean, we're essentially dealing with human behavior again and being stuck in our old ways, and the old guard will prevail again, just, I guess, in a much more tech-savvy way. Was that what you would say? Well, that's a daunting prospect.
Yeah, but we have to have these conversations, because we can't, I mean, again, back, not to be like the anti-techno utopian, but honestly, like, I think that's part of it. That's the opportunity for artists and gatekeepers, if they're interested, to change the discourse and to change the structure. I mean, if we're building this, and as you say, like, you know, these ecosystems depend, like, for that to succeed, for these ideals that we hold dearly to succeed, we do have to be mindful and intentional about how we participate and who we include and how we include.
So we have the opportunity to recreate this digital infrastructure. We have the opportunity to redesign the industry in that way, make it more inclusive, make it more accessible, equitable to everyone who's involved. And I mean, Edward, this is again where we were touching upon the underrepresentation of street artists and this field of work, which, I mean, you know, you walk across the streets, you'll see painted murals and you'll recognize them as stunning, but you don't consume them in the same way you would consume other forms of art. You wouldn't go to an auction for it in the same traditional way. So how do you see the recreation or like the greater recognition of this space and how it should be built in an NFT or, you know, a blockchain focused world?
I think it's, you know, it's about taking the opportunities. You know, I think when we opened the gallery, right, we had opportunities to just rush in and, you know, kind of, we could just emulate things that we've seen work elsewhere, or we could kind of do it with intent, you know? And I think that's kind of like the moment for everybody to like recognize in their own situations is like, how do you refocus the thing that you're doing, not just having the opportunity to do it, but like, what are you gonna do with it, you know? And I think like, now that you've got it, what are you gonna do with it is kind of like the mechanism in my head just to like build what we'd actually like to see in the world, because, you know, we're building that future we're all going to be trapped within. Create those incentivizations that make it a rewarding experience, center and offer, not even offer it, like incentivize and support opportunities for people to get onboarded and educated. Like one of the first things that we did when we got the gallery in New York was, you know, when we opened up the NFT arm last year, a big thing we wanted to do was go to friends and people that we've worked with in the past that are community organizers and see how we can kind of offer on-ramps to that community. So one of those was the Every Woman Biennial, where we partnered with C. Finley, a brilliant artist out of New York. And with her and her team, we onboarded 300 female identifying artists to the space and created an exhibition and a showcase opportunity for, again, artists from like 16 to 86, teaching them about it, doing kind of explanations on like best practices. And again, we were all learning, but, you know, finding the opportunities to provide access and dedicate resources to like creating a more balanced world and ecosystem is kind of like the opportunity we have here, because nobody has written all of the rules yet. So you kind of have that opportunity to, you know, center artists and communities and make sure that they're not boxed out. I think that was huge.
Yeah, I think essentially what it boils down to is, do we want to find and embrace these new genres and these new worlds of art, or old old being not the correct term, but long existing forms of art, and then trying to find ways for them to fit into a space that we've already created, or enable them to create their own spaces and then help them thrive. But then again, we come back to the issue of this walled garden. Then we're cultivating these communities in fixed echo chambers almost. And if we keep the culture confined, then how do we really let them scale and grow?
Can I just add
I mean,
to that?
I think there's, oh, sorry, no.
Nancy, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to respond to what you said, because I think one of the, I mean, and I'm not doing this to hype Tezos, but I do think that one of a positive externality,
Hype away.
a positive externality is that, I mean, Tezos was really the first blockchain that I used for my project because of, well, for a number of reasons, which I won't get into. However, I do think that there is a beautiful self-supporting ecosystem that is the Tezos ecosystem, first sort of born most sort of notably and on Hic et Nunc and now Object, that there are a number of artists in the audience who work with Tezos. I mean, I think, and it allows, and artists are allowed, and this isn't true just of Tezos, this is true of every blockchain, but artists collecting other artists has been another way, you know, a small one, albeit a small fraction, a margin of this market, where we've been able to support each other. And that's also really, really exciting. And I think that that is something that warrants, that's notable. You know, when we, in the spirit of critique, this is one of the positive externalities.
Yeah, it's a moment of no, go for it.
Micol, let's start with you, and then we'll go back on.
No, I was just going to say that, you know, Tezos, not to, you know, be here to hype it up, but really like accessibility, you know, like artists who are based anywhere in the world can have access to this technology because the minting fees are 0.00 what they are on Ethereum or other proof of work blockchains or other blockchains. So really, it's you know, it's an opportunity. It's a really big opportunity. Like, I work with artists from all over the world, and globally, a lot of artists cannot afford to mint on Ethereum, and that's just the reality. It's like a month of their work, you know.
Edward, you were going to raise a point earlier. Would you like to add now?
I was just going to say that I think that, like, I think it does take attacking this situation from 100 different angles. I think it takes open platforms and it takes curated platforms. I think that there's a benefit to each kind of use case because it is going to, each one will have its own on-ramp experience for people and solve a question or a problem that is created by the existence of another. And I think that when we're talking about onboarding a planet, we're going to have to find ways that are answers for each type of person. And I think that setting things that are, you know, globally accessible, like Tezos, and, like, you know, the ability for artists to collect and, you know, proselytize for other artists via, like, the object for object was a really inspiring thing. And I think it takes those as much as it takes, and I'm sorry to say this, but as much as it takes Nifty Gateway, like creating a hype machine. I think that we're talking about the many different ways that we can incentivize all the reasons we love the planet for being so different and being so unique in all the different ways that we all have a human experience. We're all going to need to be onboarded and sold this concept in a different way. So I think learning best practices and pushing the community towards best practices is essential. But I do feel that we sometimes pick each other apart, you know, and pick like enemies in the scene because they're doing it a little differently. And I think as long as they're not ripping people off or, you know, lying, cheating, stealing, I think it's really about different methodologies towards ideally a continually re-investigated North Star, you know, that we can kind of as a community agree that we're looking for better practices. We're looking for less legacy and more Web 3.0, more transparency and more onboarding and, like, you know, of all cultures to this, you know, revolutionary moment. So I think I really do like to remind people that curation and the gallery model, you know, it isn't just gatekeeping. A lot of it is support. A lot of it is taking time to pick something we're passionate about and getting behind that rather than getting behind everything. Because people want to hear a story and, you know, find why you're passionate about something. And I think that if we're all passionate about everything, you know, it just doesn't really seem genuine. And I think we have to kind of also celebrate those genuine feelings that we have as curators and audience members that want to contribute to an artist's career.
So we're looking at both a bottom-up approach, Nancy, as you mentioned, about these artists supporting each other within this space, and we also still need the top-down approach insofar in that, you know, these recognized entities help this movement establish some kind of legitimacy. If they're starting to pay attention and starting to open up to the conversation, then that's where we're going to start to attack this quote-unquote problem at all angles. Laurent, I wanted to bring this conversation back to you, and in this notion of curation, as you start to represent more of these emerging artists or digital artists who are venturing into this space, what goes into the curation when you choose an artist to work with or to choose an artist to publish within the magazine?
I think it all starts with, in the same way that we've always done, liking the work, liking the message, trying to figure out what is the essence of their creation. Is it a genuinely different approach? Is it something that is either political? Is it social? Is it whatever it is that they're tackling? It's actually having the element of genuinity that comes from a true creative, no matter if it's actually expressed on a canvas, on a JPEG, or however they're going to express themselves. And then we educate ourselves around those artists and try to find what they've done before, what they're doing, what is the long-term plan in a way. And then we'd say, yes, I think we want to highlight that artist specifically because we believe in the message, we believe in the work, and we find them interesting and relevant to the moments that we are living in. Because we never know, but we try to always be a place for artists to express themselves in ways that will last for much longer and be a testimony of the times where the artwork has been created. When we created covers for the magazine 15 years ago with artists that now are much more relevant, we're kind of happy and proud because we knew that those artists that we selected at an early stage are now becoming voices that are recognized and that are celebrated by different institutions, galleries, and things like that. It's not just about the hype of the moment. It's not about the financial element of how much this artist is selling for. It's about the genuine work that is behind and the emotion that it creates, whether being positive or negative. And I think that to go back to the point about curation, the creation comes from the education. You just have to put in the hours to actually learn about the artist, learn about the movement that they are part of. And once you are actually on top of that knowledge, then you can ask the right questions and create content that will keep on educating others. And that's our mission. And to go back to what Nancy was saying, I think that artists helping artists has always been the case. Whether being in the digital world or in the physical world, the only way to get into a gallery nowadays, and it has been the case since the Second World War, the best way is actually having an artist that is already represented by the gallery onboarding you and introducing you and saying that this work is the work that I believe in. And maybe they're not being supported financially the way that we are seeing it now with cryptos, but artists have always been in a position to help others artists, and they've been trying to do so. So I think it's just an adaptation and something that we are all working together as a community, hopefully.
So we've only actually got about 5 minutes left on the clock. And I mean, you guys have shared so many amazing perspectives, but in the limited time we have left, I'd like to go around to each of you and just ask what that one nugget of advice, like all of you are fairly well versed in this new world of crypto art, NFTs, digital ownership. What's the one piece of advice or the one thing you wish you knew or could share with someone else who's just entering this world? What do you think would be most helpful to them? Micol, why don't we start with you?
I'm a big proponent of education. So for me, whenever somebody asks me what is the advice, is to learn about the technology, to learn about what is blockchain, what is a token, what is a smart contract, what are royalties. And I think that sets a good basis to understand why this technology is powerful, why it's important for artists, for curators, for galleries, because really, like when we think about, royalties, they're not only dependent to artists themselves, but it's also for curators, also for galleries. Like the technology itself, the piece of technology that is the blockchain, I think is, to me, very interesting. And I highly encourage people to dig into it.
Nancy?
Yeah, I mean, I would second that enthusiastically, and also I would just add to fellow artists to really play with the technology itself and understand before you do it how it might resonate, deepen, and enrich the conceptual purpose of your work. How can you use it in ways, because I think that's where so much exciting innovation is happening, is when it's, it's not just about the receipt, the package, the certificate, but that it's about using these different distributed networks to do things that are radical and haven't been done before. I think that's what I would say. That's what quickens my pulse. You know what I mean? That's like what gets me excited. So that's what I would share with anyone wanting to get into it.
And Ryan?
Yeah, I think experimentation and just kind of playing around with other artists and seeing what they're doing. I mean, for example, Nancy's work is incredible because her piece that we had at in Los Angeles didn't live in a gallery. It lived actually in the IRL environment. So I think that for new artists to kind of educate themselves about what other artists are using, how they're utilizing this tech, and then use that as kind of like a springboard for them to be creative.
And then Edward?
I would say, I think something that's really been refreshing to remember and experience again and again with this, and what I would tell anybody who's just starting to get into it, everyone else in this scene, in this community, in this ecosystem wants to meet you and talk about it. It's when you're in a room with them, you don't have to feel shy, like maybe I shouldn't ask a question or maybe I shouldn't say hello. This is, and every one of these conferences that we've been going to now, it's like an idea fair mixed with a job fair, and everyone is ecstatic. I feel like it's such an emotional moment for the entire concept. So I think anyone who is interested in it and wants to talk to someone about it, it's literally as easy as walking up and saying hello, because people want to meet you and want to talk about it. So I think that's been, and there's no faster way to learn, to second what everyone has said before me. It is about education and sharing that education and making sure that people don't feel that that should not be gatekept. There's no curator that should be in charge of your access to information or independence, how you operate in the field. Like, all of this should be about emboldening artists to be able to do it without any of us, and then to add value when we work together. I think that's what I'd say.
And last but not least, Laurent?
Well, I would second the education part, obviously, but I would just say also
Great consensus, guys.
Yeah, exactly. No, I would say that there's no risk. Just express yourself as long as you're genuine. We are at the infancy of this entire brave new world. So just embrace it, be creative, but be genuine. Do not try to replicate whatever works or the things that you've seen already. Try to find your voice. And this is something I would tell to any artist. Just be genuine to your work, be true to yourself, and then the good thing is there's almost no risk. You can actually mint as much as you want and the market will be there anyway.
So in summary, we have get educated, be experimental, have conversations and build your community and take risks. I mean, I couldn't put it better myself. So welcome. Massive thank you. And any other questions in the last 10, 20 seconds that we have on the clock? Because I feel like we covered a lot of ground, so I'd quite like to leave it on that high. But thank you all so much for being here and taking the time to join us for this conversation. It's been incredible.
Thank
you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.